welcome to the HR and Leadership Podcast with me, Lee Martin. Each episode will explore current issues and challenges for leaders and HR professionals and present innovative, engaging and practical solutions. I'll be joined by a variety of business leaders, consultants and HR professionals who will share their experiences and advice. So if you're looking for new ideas, tips and insights to the latest HR topics, subscribe to our channel wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome, Geraldine Hickey from Iterum Consultancy. And basically, delighted to have you on board here. I'm a long-term friend and associate of 2J's. We've done some fantastic work together, but considering this topic, I thought I'd just like to pick your brains on this and tap into your expertise and your experience. So today we're just talking about how you have difficult conversations and specifically how leaders can manage that conflict. And I know from both of our experiences and conversations in the past, we've experienced that with leaders coming to us and saying they don't know how to deal with certain situations or deal with difficult conversations. So, I just wanted to kind of pick your brains on that and your experiences, Geraldine.
Lovely. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, difficult conversations. And it's okay that they're difficult, right?
Yeah.
I think sometimes both in my professional career and now working as a consultant and helping a whole variety of clients, people sometimes come to you and say, but it's really bad that I find these difficult, and almost like they're doing something wrong because they find these conversations difficult, but sometimes they just are difficult. So I'm delighted to talk to you about that today, and hopefully I can share some nuggets of useful information.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess it's a mindset thing, isn't it? That so many managers or leaders think that conflict is a bad thing. But actually, as we both know, it should be a positive thing, be viewed as exactly that, because out of those difficult conversations, out of those conflict scenarios, often progress is made. And it's better to actually address those. And I guess from my point of view, that's one of the things that I often talk to leaders about when they say that there's a difficult situation or conflict that they're faced with, that the one thing they must do is not avoid it or not ignore it. And it's about recognizing that, first of all, that you've got to confront it, you've got to get through it, you've got to kind of deal with it, which then leads on to the conversation of how you go about doing it. But that's the first thing, really, just recognizing that, it happens. It's healthy that it happens, and definitely do not ignore it.
Yes. And I think that in my HR leader career, I would love to be able to put a finite percentage on it, which I can't, but I would say that a really significant proportion of HR problems, I say HR problems, by the time they would get to my door and they were causing either a very big difficulty in a department or a function of the business, or worse, leading to really complex kind of employee relations cases, more often than not, they started because we were avoiding dealing with having challenging, difficult, or meaningful conversations. And I think that that's a huge thing. So no, we can't avoid them, but all managers and leaders out there take comfort from the fact that so many people do. It is very, very common. I think there was a stat, you'll know this one because we've talked about this before, in a survey where 71% of managers cited that they actively avoided dealing with challenging, difficult conversations. And the reason for that, 84% of them said the reason for that was because they were so frightened of making it worse.
Wow.
But you have to ask yourself the question, by not dealing with it, it's going to get worse, because the problem never goes away. The problem never gets addressed. Perhaps some healthy conflict or meaningful conversations will not come out of that. But think of the ripple effect within your team and the area of the business for having something that's not addressed. And what comes back to you, why is Geraldine not dealing with it? Why does she never, focus on dealing with that person or this problem? There's a whole host of things to unpick there.
Absolutely. That, like you say, is a scary stat, isn't it, in terms of
Yeah.
those percentages? And I think you're also right in terms of the subsequent impact on your credibility as a
Hmm.
leader if
Hmm.
you're seen by the rest of the team or colleagues for avoiding it and not actually
Yeah.
addressing the situation.
Yeah.
So I think twofold there, like you say, dealing with the kind of credibility and also kind of dealing with well, not dealing with the actual issue in front
Yeah.
of you. So do you feel
Yeah.
from your experience that many organizations train their leaders and managers on how to deal with difficult conversations? Because I reflect back to my career in the corporate world many years ago now, but there wasn't any specific skills training back then in terms of how to have a conversation, a difficult conversation, be it internally or even externally. So yeah, just your thoughts on that, really.
Yeah, I agree. I think when I think of me and my own management career prior to going into the world of HR, um, and then kind of going through and progressing in the kind of HR leadership ranks, I think there was very little that focused on specifically this issue. We may have done management training around all sorts of things, how to be more effective, whatever it might have been. But, I don't ever really recall companies being very good at specifically doing that. I think it's better now. I
Mm.
think a lot of the work I do and we do this comes up, and certainly I try to encompass it into any sort of suite of management training that we're doing because it's such a big thing. People really need it. I think one of the things that's really important when you mentioned mindset, and that's one thing. But I think one of the things that's really important for someone, if they find this hard, is to ask yourself, why do you find it so hard?
Yeah, true.
Um, and if you sit in a room full of leaders or managers, you'll get lots of different answers to that because we're all unique, right? Everyone finds different things difficult. Some people will say, well, I don't find these things hard at all. I find them really easy. And I would actually ask a question around that as well, because if it's a truly difficult conversation, in the context of what you and I are talking about now, then if it's being delivered by, the method of water off a duck's back, and I'll just tell you straight, then I'm not sure it might have the outcome that you're hoping for either. But I think, why do you find it difficult? Is it fear of, probably the thing I hear most is fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of making the problem worse, dislike of conflict, fear of how the person might react, um, a general worry of, what if I, get tied up in knots? This person is really good at coming back with
Mm.
a counter argument, and I need some time to think about that, and I can't get my words out. I think if you start from the starting point of what is it that's making you hesitant about having this conversation, then that's a really good place to start to understand, well, what do I need to do then to make it feel a little bit better?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think to unpick that right from the very beginning, rather than just kind of diving in there, and I often see this, not just with this particular topic, but others, that people just want to go into solution mode straight away
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of, in this situation, deal with the conversation. But you're absolutely right. Just resisting that temptation, taking a step back and just almost being proactive in terms of planning out how you're going
Yeah,
to deal with this. And that
yeah,
planning out, as you quite rightly say, starts with looking at yourself. Well, what's the apprehension? What is the
yeah,
concern? Why am I kind
yeah,
of nervous about dealing with this? And for all the
yeah,
reasons you've just mentioned there, I think can apply for different people. Um, I think again, in terms of that, it's kind of think about what is the structure. How would you actually advise or coach someone on how to start the kind of process then? So initially looking at yourselves and addressing those fears, but what else would you say is a key aspect that they should be thinking about?
I think the number one priority is preparation. So, again, in my own career as a leader and a manager, I knew there were people within my realm. So, both people within my team that I was responsible to lead or manage or support or coach, and then the wider business team. Okay. And I think I know there was people that I wouldn't need to do much preparation, and I could go and have a meaningful feedback conversation. So let's say feedback. And I think it's quite important to be clear on what we're talking about here in terms
Mm.
of a difficult conversation. So mindset you've talked about is quite important, and maybe we'll come back to that. But I think we're talking about a conversation that if you are the one that's approaching it that gets out of hand and doesn't go well, so whether that would lead to conflict or someone feeling very disillusioned or disengaging or all the things. So we're not talking about, Lee, I'm going to come and give you some really positive and affirming feedback here. We're talking about this could go a little bit into a tricky situation. So I think preparation, and I know there was people I could go and have those kind of conversations and it would be absolutely fine. And then there were other individuals that I would have to sit down and really and truly prepare. And I learned the hard way, if I'm really honest, when I was younger. So I think number one is to sit down and prepare. Think about, what am I worried about? And try to make yourself feel more comfortable. Is it a knowledge thing? Well, let's go and get some more knowledge so you know what you're talking about. Is it handling a difficult situation? Well, or something might get out of control or it might become heated. What am I going to do if that happens? Sometimes with my clients, I'll say, let's write a script. Because if you think of everything that you want to say, put yourself in the person's shoes and say, well, how would I feel? I think that's hugely important. Sometimes I think when we speak to someone, particularly if we find this difficult, we're just so thankful to get it done. From your point of view, we don't stop and think, well, how am I going to receive this message? How would I feel? So always putting yourself in the other person's shoes and thinking, am I saying what I'm meaning to say, and will they understand that in the way that I'm intending? And I think that's often a big part of what goes wrong. There are many models, feedback models. Have a Google, there's loads, and find some that are one or two that really feel like it's a good fit for you, and then use that as a basis. Some of my favorites are the BOCA model, the Boost model.
Yeah, which
You'll
we've
know these
used, yeah.
well. Yeah, and sometimes people will say to me, "Oh, that feels a bit sort of like being at school, like where I'm a leader in a firm, I've got a team of X number of people." But if you use it as a framework and almost like a sort of checklist to say, "Am I remembering all of these things?" Um, they all have differences. I think definite advice that is sort of mission critical is being objective, making sure you own the feedback. I've had so many conversations over many, many years where people come in and said, well, such and such told me that. That's great. I'll
Yes.
deal with it. And you go off to such and such, the next person, and it goes horribly wrong. So you have to sort of own the feedback, make sure you've got your facts. If you can
Yeah.
observe it yourself, all the better. So that you can actually deliver really meaningful feedback coming from the horse's mouth because as opposed to someone's told you what they would like you to know. And that's a reality. So being very considerate about that. So and open-minded to, just because you think it's going to be one way doesn't necessarily mean to say it's exactly as it's perceived.
You're absolutely right. And again, often found myself in situations where you go into a conversation expecting one thing to be discussed, and actually, when you listen, something else comes out
Yeah.
and it takes the conversation into a different direction. So
Yes.
for me, that really highlights again that the kind of planning stage and the anticipating how the
Yes.
conversation might go. I think all the points you mentioned there, I totally agree with. And like you say, the variety of different models and structure you can have. Often when I've talked to clients, in addition to kind of thinking about themselves and why there is that adversity to touching on the conflict, as you mentioned previously, there's almost a 3-stage plan process from my point of view. It's when they are going to have the conversation, it's actually thinking about where are they going to have the conversation,
Yes.
and making sure the environment is appropriate for that difficult conversation. Now, particularly as you alluded to, if the conflict or the conversation takes an unfortunate twist and kind of gets aggressive or kind of heated, then you don't want to be doing that in the middle of your team. So again,
Absolutely.
thinking about the appropriate environments is the key thing, and planning that out. And then it's really about what are you going to say? What's the conversation going to consist of? How will it flow? How much listening? How much telling? How much empathy? How much kind of instruction, etc. So what are you actually going to say? And then for me, the third part of our kind of conflict triangle would be how. How do you have the conversation? And that again goes back to the models that you've just alluded to, the Boca model, structuring it, the actual articulation, even thinking about your tone in terms of how you predict things, and even your seating position, whether you stood up having this conversation, whether you sat down, how you sat down. So there's so many variables there to kind of consider. It can get, and you can understand why leaders get a little bit daunted or a little bit off put by actually dealing with these things when there's so many to consider.
Yeah, I think that it amazes me sometimes, even today, where we don't put intentional thought into these things. You know, I'm just going to deliver some tricky news or some bad news or sad news, or just give someone some feedback on the production line. When everyone else, even if they can't hear, they can see, right? You know, sometimes your body language speaks 1,000 words and you never have to hear a single one.
Yeah, very true.
And I think these things are all really, really important as well. I think also going into these conversations thinking, what is my intention here? Am I trying to fix a problem? Am I trying to stop an activity or a behavior that is not going well and it needs to change? You know, what do I want the person that I'm speaking to come away feeling and thinking? And I think sometimes recognizing, you know, if you know your team really well, you can have a pretty good steer on how they may feel or react about that. Are they a feeling person? Are they a more cerebral person? You know, do they tend to get defensive, but then after a couple of hours of thinking about it, they might come back to you and say, actually, I thought about what you said. We're all different. So I think thinking about this person who I know well, I'm going to speak to, how do I make sure I give the best shot of them really understanding my intention? So you know what you're worried about before going into it. You know what you want them to get out of it and the outcome to be, and use that as sort of the start and the end point of how you structure the conversation. And I think thinking about different eventualities, what will I do if they get really defensive? How would I handle that? Because very often, again, if I had to put a percentage on the amount of times that people have come and asked me for some advice because it's got out of hand in the moment, and actually taking some time out to stop and think, what will I do if? And really that can only be useful if you've thought about what am I worried about before I go into this conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, for me, it comes back to knowing your people, as you alluded to, and as a leader, a manager, taking the time to get to know your team and build those trust relationships. Because when that trust relationship is strong, it makes the difficult conversation easier because both parties know that you can be open and honest and be frank, etc. When that trust isn't in place, it makes it so much more difficult to kind of, you're almost skirting around issues because you're trying to be over polite or considerate, as it were. I guess in terms of those things, it's kind of being conscious of them, as you say, but really just kind of being aware of, before you go into the conversation, how the other person is likely to act. I had a quick question that's often been mentioned to me. At what stage do you bring someone else into the meeting? And I know from your HR background, you've probably been involved in these as well, but should a manager, should a leader always bring HR into a really difficult conversation and sit with them? What's the pros and cons of that, do you think? Calling all HR professionals, leaders and managers, are you ready to take your workplace strategy to the next level? At 2Js, we get it. Managing people, driving engagement, and keeping up with ever-changing HR challenges isn't easy. But what if you had instant access to expert-led training, ready-to-use HR toolkits, and practical resources, all designed to make your job easier? From leadership development to conflict resolution, employee engagement to resilience training, we've got the solutions you need when you need them. And here's something just for you. Use discount code podcast25 at the checkout for 25% off all purchases at 2J's HR store. No more wasting time on outdated processes. Visit 2jshrstore.com today and claim your exclusive discount. Because great HR isn't just about policies, it's about people.
Oh, that is a very good question. So let me think how I can give a considered answer. That's a hard one. I think so before I answer that question, let me frame it in this way. My question would be, what kind of feedback culture do you have within your department, your team, your area of the business? And I think that is something that businesses didn't talk enough about, and maybe now are finally starting to. So if you have a feedback culture where you regularly and often give feedback, and for me, this is something I feel so strongly about, Lee. Feedback should be, we give feedback when the going is good. We say when a job is really well done. We give praise and recognition and motivation, not to be all fluffy and nice. That's very Geraldine-like. Those of you who know me will know that, because it's right. And we all want to know that we're doing all right. Some people really value getting, that motivation of, I'm doing a good job, I'm being seen, I'm visible, I'm valued. Some people don't need that, but you need to give credit where credit's due. I say this to clients a lot. You need to give credit where credit's due. And if your team are used to very regularly hearing from you, then it means that feedback that is either constructive or verging into the difficult stuff that we're talking about doesn't then stick out like a sore thumb. We have all worked with leaders and managers who only ever tell you when it's the bad stuff.
Yeah,
and some, I've had so many people sitting beside me on the desk saying, I've done this, I do this, I work this, all of the other achievements and things that really intrinsically matter to them never get noticed, but we tell you the one thing that you've not done right. And that is so destroying for some people. Not everyone, again, knowing your people, but it's so destroying. So I think that's the first thing, as a precursor to answering your question. If you have or want to try and create a good and positive, strong feedback culture, then two-way communication and feedback becomes irregular. I think, including the difficult stuff. And you have that kind of culture. You talked about trust, Lee. Again, that is absolutely huge. What do your team feel about you? Are you trusted by your team? And how much do you trust your team? And you have those two things, then it's so much easier to manage the tricky stuff. Okay. If you have a more kind of open and foster and collaborative communication structure, in terms of feedback, then being able to have feedback conversations with your team where you're delivering something that could be tricky is much easier. So no, I think if you rock on up and pull in another manager or a supervisor or an HR representative, all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is formal. I'm in for a fight, or oh my gosh, I'm in big trouble. So I don't think that is necessarily where you want to go. There is a caveat, however, if you are in the kind of environment where it's very contentious and you could potentially open yourself or the person you're speaking to up to something, then if you are more comfortable to have someone there with you, or that is how your organization currently does things, then I would say to exercise some caution to say, I'm going to create a much better feedback culture and just stop having someone in with me, because depending on what it's about, it could be one person's view against the other. I would say in a situation where it's a potentially very serious thing, breaches of perhaps safety or allegations or anything of a serious nature, then the first thing you should be doing is going and getting some advice. And someone may well sit in with you, but you would certainly be getting some advice. I think if it gives you pause for thought, go and ask someone in your HR or your line manager, what do I do about this? Don't just go off and say, we're telling me I need to be better at giving feedback, I'm going to dive right in. I think if it gives you pause for thought, then there's a reason you're pausing for thought. So
I
yeah,
think
sometimes it's really
that's great
beneficial to have
advice.
someone with you.
I think that's great advice. And I think, again, you're absolutely spot on that, as we both know, having spoken to many leaders and managers in our time, they often feel that it's a very lonely role and they have to kind
Yes,
of deal with things themselves. But for
yes,
me, the key is what you've just alluded to there. If you find yourself in that situation, unsure how to broach the situation, either on your own or should you bring someone
yeah,
in, and then speak to someone,
yeah,
about it. As you
yeah,
say, either a line manager, a peer, or ideally your HR department and your HR
yeah,
professionals there that can give you that advice.
yes,
I'm with you though. I think for me personally, from my experiences, when there has been an unexpected third party in the room or turning up for the
yeah,
conversation, all that does is just put the other party on the defensive. The drawbridge comes up and they almost close
yes,
up and they go
yeah,
into almost fight mode, as it were.
yes,
So you have to be very, very certain that that's the right thing to do to get a
yeah,
third party involved in the conversation,
yeah,
for fear of destroying the trust or the
yes,
relationship,
yeah,
particularly if you hadn't advised the third party that there was going to be
yes,
another person in the room before they actually come to the conversation.
yeah,
It's that shock. Oh, you're here. Well, what are you doing here? Kind of thing. So again, it's an opportunity, I guess, a tool to use as an additional person, but like most things, be very, very cautious and careful. And I personally would avoid that. I'd be much more
yes,
keen to make sure the relationship was open and honest between the two individuals, rather than having
yeah,
to have a third party who's often seen as almost a referee at times,
yes,
or kind of the big bad arm of HR, kind of looking
yeah,
to make notes and report on you in the future. So yeah, very
yeah.
cautious and very, very good advice there in terms of how you deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is important to really note that usually companies' policies and procedures, again, that sounds like a very formulaic HR thing to say, but they'll be pretty clear on what kind of situations warrant that. Anything that could potentially be putting a person at risk, the business at risk, that tends to be more big ticket stuff. Interestingly enough, Lee, a lot of what I hear from clients, and also in my own corporate career when I was in house, um, handling difficult conversations in the context of more sort of discipline type of ideas for those people who find them difficult, tend to feel more comfortable than just going in and giving a feedback conversation that could go a wee bit wrong. And I think a big part of that is probably because there's a structure around it. You're not on your own. You're absolutely right. It can feel really lonely sometimes to be a manager and a leader, particularly when you're in this kind of territory. Um, Also, you're dealing totally in fact, and you're more impartial when you get to that point. So the area that's fraught with difficulty is the highly, can we have a little chat? I need to give you some feedback, or I'd like to give you some feedback. That's can be scarier, or that's what I found certainly.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it can. And again, as we've talked, I think preparation is key.
yeah,
Whether it's the more formal kind of disciplinary or grievance hearings, as we both know from our own experiences in corporates,
yeah,
etc., that those do come themselves with a lot of pre-work and planning and
yeah,
investigation and structure, for the very
yeah,
reason that things have to be seen to be done appropriately in line with legislation, best practice,
yeah,
etc. So I agree with you. I think there is a safety net around that approach. But so often, a lot of the time, the kind of less formal feedback,
yeah,
even though they're difficult conversations, don't have that preparation, or managers don't give it sufficient preparation.
yeah,
It's often on the hoof. It's often kind of immediate, and some feedback needs to be given in a timely fashion. But I would argue that you still need to spend sufficient time prepping. And as we've talked about, looking at yourself, your own mindset, then looking at the structure of the conversation, where you're going to have it, what you're going to say, how you're going to say, all the
yes,
things we mentioned before. And that takes time. And
yeah,
unfortunately, I see in a lot of organizations, because there's so much pressure on
yes,
speed of productivity, meeting customer deadlines, etc., managers feeling under pressure to kind of get stuff done,
yeah,
they don't feel they have the time to step back off that hamster wheel of business business as usual, to plan, prepare, and put themselves in the best possible position for these difficult conversations, which then subsequently builds up the kind of fear factor before they broach it, or even the conversation not going as well as it should do. So, how would you advise managers break that mold, as it were, and find the time to prepare?
Okay, it's really hard. This is something I struggled with greatly in my own management career, finding the time to get stuff done. There aren't enough hours in the day. It's very, very difficult to get the big ticket things done or the little things that need to get done when the day job is so vast. And I think that's stood the test of time forever. That is just a fact. I think that if you really care about your people and you really care about your team, then addressing things that need to be addressed is sort of mission critical for the success of your overall team, their performance. Again, we touched on the ripple effect of not dealing with things. If you, as a leader of or a manager of your people, really care about their success, and ultimately their success leads to the overall department or function success, then we know that we can't avoid these conversations. So I was as guilty as anyone else of saying, it'll be fine, I'll spend some time preparing, I'll get it done, and I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. I think it's about really organizing and structuring your time and saying, I am going to take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever you need, block it out in your diary, have some do not disturb time, and sit down and do it. Again, depending on how you like to organize your work life, for those who are very structured and organized, then managing their diary or their calendar in that way will come very naturally. For those of us who like to put things off and be, like a good procrastinate, you just need to do it. Sometimes the thought of it is much worse than actually doing it. So I think you need to ask yourself, what is the risk of me not preparing effectively to go into this conversation? And I guess we're all, able to make our own decisions. Can I let that go and I'll just go in and do it? Or is this one really mission critical that if it goes wrong, the impact could be much worse? So therefore, I need to find even half an hour. 30 minutes, 20 minutes is better than none at all. As I say, I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the amount of times I would then have to support, managers and leaders get out of a difficult situation, or when it had escalated and snowballed. That's the truth. It escalated and snowballed because we didn't have the conversation timely, and it wasn't well prepared, and the person on the receiving end took it very differently from the intention, and it created a much bigger issue than it might have been had we just invested some time.
I think you're
that would
spot
be
on
my
there.
advice. I can't, there's no magic wand or silver bullet on that one. I think my advice to anyone would be, what is the risk of you not finding 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever in your diary to do this? And, link that back. Well, how much do I care about my team? How important is it that I have this conversation? And take it from there.
I think you've given us a really good soundbite there for this podcast, because again, just hitting the nail on the head there in terms of, if you really care about your team, find the time. That is so crucial, so important.
Yeah.
I think there's so many things that we've talked about so far in terms of guidance and reflection and planning and structure, etc., to ensure that managers do feel comfortable and equipped to deal with these difficult conversations. But if there was one final thing that you would give as a golden nugget, as it were, a piece of advice in terms of how to handle difficult conversations and how managers should deal with a conflict, what would that one piece of golden advice be, do you think?
I think I feel like I want to give you 5. Be consistent.
I know it's a difficult ask.
I think be consistent. Be consistent in your management practice and be fair. What kind of manager or leader do you want to be? For me, it was always when I go home, can I sleep at night because I've handled everything that's had to come up? And being in an HR role can be tough sometimes. It can be hard, can be a bit lonely. So being fair with your team and being consistent, which is probably not the nugget you're looking for, because preparation or I think being fair, if you want to have a team who trust you and you can trust them, then you can't have one rule for one and one rule for the other. You're not going to do your team any favors if you regularly feedback to one person because they're more like you and it's comfortable. You can't jump on someone for something they do if you're not going to address it with someone else. So I think of all of the things I've experienced in my career so far that I could give a nugget to anyone else, be fair. I say this to clients as well all the time. Be fair and consistent in your management practice will help you out of so many situations in the long term.
Awesome. That's great, Geraldine. Thank you so much. Some fantastic words of
Thank you.
wisdom there, which I know that your consultant clients benefit from. So hopefully those people listening to this podcast have taken the key learning points from it. But if they want more information, contact you directly, contact us, etc. Yep. We can help give further advice. But for the time being, Geraldine, that's been absolutely fantastic. Been a pleasure to have you join us on this podcast. Hope to see you on future episodes. But again, thank you very much for your time and advice.
Thank you so much for having me. My pleasure.